I saw my daughter-in-law. With my own two eyes, I saw her throw that leather suitcase into the cold waters of Willow Creek and then speed away. When I finally dragged it to the shore, my trembling hands fumbled with the latch, and what I saw inside made my 2-year-old heart stop beating. My name is Martha Hayes, a retired school teacher from Oregon, and this is the story of how a quiet afternoon became the start of the most terrible nightmare I've ever known. It's a story of betrayal, of greed, and of a love so strong it just might conquer death itself. If my story touches your heart today, perhaps you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. We're glad to have you with us. Please, leave a comment below, share your own story or your thoughts, because we all have our burdens, and sharing them, well, it makes the load a little lighter. It was 5:15 inches the afternoon. I know that for a fact because I just poured myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, and my eyes happened to glance over at the old grandfather clock in the kitchen. It was my mother's clock, an old family heirloom whose ticking no longer measured time, but the stretching, silent moments of my loneliness. I was standing out on my porch, in the old wooden chair that my only son, Sam, had built for me with his own two hands, his last Thanksgiving with us. This house, the one where I'd raised Sam from a tow-headed little boy into a tall, fine man, now felt too big, too quiet. It felt suffocating with the ghosts of memories ever since I buried him 6 months ago. Before me, Willow Creek Lake stretched out like a vast silver mirror, perfectly still. October afternoons in Oregon can be strange sometimes. The sun was still beating down, and the heat was that thick, humid kind that makes sweat trickle down the back of your neck, soaking the collar of my silk blouse, even though I was just standing there. The air felt heavy, dense, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I took a sip of my tea, the bitter tang of bergamot on my tongue, trying to find a little peace in the familiar view. And then, I saw her. The silver sedan belonging to Veronica, my daughter-in-law, my son's widow, suddenly appeared at the end of the gravel path by the lake. She wasn't driving, she was hurtling, tearing through the quiet with an unnatural roar of the engine and a cloud of reddish-brown dust billowing up behind her. I knew that path. Every pebble, every turn. Sam and I had walked it 1,000 times when he was a boy, his small hand tucked inside mine. Nobody drives on that path like a bat out of hell, not unless they're running from something or running to commit a crime. My heart started to beat all wrong. The car screeched to a halt right at the water's edge. The sound of the tires grinding on the gravel was just awful. A thick cloud of dust rolled toward the porch, sending me into a coughing fit. The teacup slipped from my fingers, shattering on the wooden deck. White porcelain sprayed across the boards like broken pieces of memory, but I didn't have the mind to care. Every last one of my senses was focused on the woman who had just gotten out of that car. Veronica sprang from the driver's seat like she'd been launched. She was still wearing that gray silk dress Sam had bought her for their anniversary. Her long dark hair was a mess, stuck to her flushed face. She looked like someone who had just been crying, or screaming, or maybe both. She threw open the trunk with so much force, I thought the lid would rip right off its hinges. And then I saw it. The suitcase, that cursed brown leather suitcase that I myself had given her as a wedding gift. So you can carry your dreams with you wherever you go. I told her that day, with all the naive hope of a mother wishing for her son to be loved. Now, looking at it, all I felt was a bitter, foolish sting. Veronica wrestled the suitcase out of the trunk. It was heavy. I could see it in the way her back bent, the way her slender arms trembled under the strain. It didn't look like it was full of clothes for a trip. It looked dead heavy. She glanced around, a quick, panicked, guilty look. That look, I will never forget it. It was the look of someone who knows they are doing something terribly, unforgivably wrong. Then she started dragging the suitcase toward the edge of the water. Every step seemed to be a struggle, as if she were carrying the weight of the whole world on her shoulders, or something even worse. "Veronica!" I tried to shout from the porch, but the sound that came out was just a weak whisper, swallowed up by the afternoon air. Or maybe she just didn't want to hear me. She swung the suitcase. Once, twice, and on the third try, with a guttural sound that ripped from her throat, she heaved it out into the water. A sickening, final thump cut through the air. A flock of birds exploded from the treetops in a panic. The lake water splashed. Veronica just stood there, still as a statue, watching the suitcase float for one brief moment before it began to sink, leaving widening rings on the surface that finally disappeared. Then, she ran. She ran back to her car like the devil himself was on her heels. The engine roared to life again, tires spitting gravel as she made a clumsy three-point turn. She vanished back down the path, leaving behind nothing but a cloud of dust and a silence that was so heavy it was terrifying. I was frozen to the spot. 10 seconds, 20, 30. My 2-year-old brain was trying to catch up with what my eyes had just seen. Veronica, the suitcase, the lake, the sheer desperation in her every move. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. A chill ran right down my spine, despite the heat. My legs started moving before my mind gave the command. I ran. Lord, I haven't run like that in years. My knees screamed in protest, shooting pains like tiny needles. My lungs burned. But I didn't stop. I flew down the porch steps, across the yellowing lawn, and onto the gravel path. My slippers kicked up dust. The lake was about 100 yards away. Maybe less, maybe more. I don't know. I just knew that every second felt like an eternity. By the time I reached the shore, I was gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The suitcase was still there, sinking slowly. Its leather skin was waterlogged, dark and heavy. Without a second thought, I waded into the water. It was surprisingly cold, a shock that went straight to my bones. The water came up to my knees, then my waist. The muddy bottom sucked at my feet, and I nearly lost a slipper. I stretched forward, my trembling fingers reaching out. I caught hold of one of the handles. I pulled. It was impossibly heavy, like it was filled with rocks. Or worse. I didn't dare think about what could be worse. I gritted my teeth, pulling with everything I had. My old arm muscles, weakened by age, shook with the strain. Lake water splashed in my face, tasting of mud. Finally, the suitcase budged. I started dragging it, step by agonizing step, toward the shore. And then I heard it. A sound. Faint, muffled, from inside the case. The blood in my veins turned to ice. No, it can't be. Oh God. Please, dear God, don't let it be what I think it is. I pulled harder, faster, with a desperation that gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I hauled the suitcase onto the wet sand at the edge of the water and then collapsed next to it. My hands, shaking something awful, went for the zipper. It was stuck, wet, and maybe a little rusted. My fingers kept slipping. Come on now, come on. I mumbled through clenched teeth. Tears started to well up, blurring my vision. I used my fingernail to pry at the zipper pull. Once, twice, it gave way. I lifted the lid, and what I saw inside made my whole world stop. My heart stopped beating. The air caught in my throat. My hands flew to my mouth to stifle a scream of pure horror. There, wrapped in a soaking wet light blue blanket, was a baby. A newborn baby, so tiny, so fragile, and so terribly still. His lips were blue. His skin was as pale as wax. His eyes were closed. He wasn't moving. Oh, dear God. Oh, God. No. My hands were shaking too badly to touch him at first. I lifted the baby out of the suitcase with a gentleness I didn't know I still had in me. He was cold, ice cold. He weighed less than a bag of sugar. His tiny head rested in the palm of my hand. His umbilical cord was still attached, tied off with a piece of twine. Twine, not a medical clamp. A slick piece of twine, as if someone had done this at home, in secret, without any help. No, 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 I whispered, over and over. I pressed my ear to his tiny chest. Silence. Nothing. I desperately pressed my cheek to his nose. And then, I felt it. A puff of air, so faint I thought I'd imagined it, but it was there. He was breathing, just barely, a thread of a breath, but he was breathing. Hope and horror exploded inside me, all at once. He was alive. He was still fighting, and I had to save him. I scrambled to my feet, my old legs nearly giving out beneath me on the wet sand. I clutched the baby to my chest, his cold, wet blanket pressing against me. I ran back toward the house, faster than I had run to the lake. Water dripped from my soaked clothes. My bare feet pounded on the sharp gravel of the path, and I could feel them start to bleed, but I felt no pain. All I felt was terror, urgency, and a desperate primal need to save this tiny soul shivering in my arms. I burst through the door of my house, making some kind of garbled sound. Maybe it was help, maybe it was, oh God, I don't know. I grabbed the old landline phone from the kitchen wall with one hand, the other still holding the baby tight. My fingers were slick on the buttons. The phone nearly slipped from my grasp twice. Finally, I managed to dial the 3 numbers that mattered. 911. What is your emergency? A calm female voice said on the other end. A baby, I sobbed. I found a baby. In the lake. He's not responding. He's so cold. He's blue. Please send help. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. What is your address? I rattled off my address, the words tumbling over each other. The operator told me to lay the baby on a flat surface. I looked around and, with one arm, swept everything off the kitchen table. Plates, mail, a stack of old newspapers. It all crashed to the floor in a deafening clatter. None of it mattered. I carefully placed the baby on the wooden tabletop. So small, so fragile, so quiet. Is he breathing? The woman on the phone asked. Yes, I think so, I said, my voice trembling. Very, very shallow. Okay, listen to me very carefully. I'm going to talk you through this. You need to get a clean towel and dry the baby off, very gently, then wrap him up to keep him warm. The ambulance is on its way. I followed her instructions like a machine. I ran to the bathroom, grabbing a stack of fluffy towels. I dried his tiny body with clumsy, desperate movements. Every second was an eternity. I wrapped the baby in clean, dry towels. I picked him up again, holding him close. I started rocking him without thinking, an ancient instinct I thought I'd forgotten. Hang on, little one, I whispered to him. Please hang on. They're coming. They're coming to save you. The minutes I waited for the ambulance were the longest of my 72 years. The wail of the siren ripped through the silence. Red and white lights flashed through my windows. I ran to the door. 2 paramedics rushed out of the ambulance. An older man with a salt and pepper beard and a young woman with her dark hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. The young woman took the baby from my arms with a professionalism that made my heart ache. She checked the baby quickly, pulling out a stethoscope, listening. Her face was a mask, but I saw her shoulders tense. Severe hypothermia, possible water aspiration, she said to her partner. We need to go now. They placed him on a tiny gurney, fitting a tiny oxygen mask over his face. Their hands moved with a swift efficiency, connecting wires, monitors, things I didn't understand. The man looked at me. You're coming with us. It wasn't a question. I climbed into the back of the ambulance, sitting on the small seat on the side. I couldn't take my eyes off the baby, so tiny amongst all that medical equipment. The ambulance took off, siren screaming. The world outside blurred into a smear of color through the window. How did you find him, ma'am? The female paramedic asked while she continued to work. In a suitcase, I answered, my voice hoarse. In the lake, I saw someone throw it in. She looked up, her eyes locking with mine. Then she glanced at her partner. I saw something in her expression. Concern, maybe suspicion, maybe pity. Did you see who it was? I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Veronica, my daughter-in-law, my son's widow, the woman who had cried at Sam's funeral like her world had ended, the same woman who had just tried to drown a baby. How could I say it? How could I even believe it myself? Yes, I finally said. I saw who it was. We reached Willow Creek General Hospital in less than 15 minutes. The emergency room doors flew open. A team of nearly a dozen people in blue and white scrubs surrounded the gurney. They were shouting numbers, medical terms, orders. They pushed the baby through a set of double doors. I tried to follow, but a nurse gently stopped me. Ma'am, you need to wait here. The doctors are working. We need to get some information. She led me to a waiting room. Beige walls, plastic chairs, and the overwhelming smell of antiseptic. I sat down. I was shaking from head to toe. I couldn't tell if it was from the cold of my wet clothes or from the shock. It was probably both. The nurse sat across from me. She was older than the paramedic, closer to my age. She had kind crinkles around her eyes. Her name tag said, "Joan, I need you to tell me everything that happened," she said in a soft voice. And so I did. I told her every detail, from seeing Veronica's car to opening that suitcase. Joan typed notes into a tablet. She nodded. She didn't interrupt. When I was finished, she let out a long, slow breath. "The police are going to want to talk to you," she said. "This is attempted murder. Maybe worse." Attempted murder. The words hung in the air like vultures. My daughter-in-law, my son's wife, a murderer. I couldn't process it. I couldn't make it make sense. Joan put her hand on mine. "You did a good thing. You saved a life today." But I didn't feel like I had. I felt like I had uncovered something monstrous, something I could never push back into the darkness, something that would change everything, forever. It was 2 hours before a doctor came to speak with me. He was young, maybe 35. He had deep circles under his eyes, and his hands smelled of antibacterial soap. "The baby is stable," he said. "For now. He's in the neonatal intensive care unit. He has severe hypothermia, and he aspirated some water. There's damage to his lungs. The next 48 hours are critical." "Is he going to live?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I don't know," he said with a brutal honesty. "We're doing everything we can." The police arrived a half hour later. 2 officers, a woman in her 40s with her hair in a tight bun, and a younger man who took notes. The woman introduced herself as Detective Miller. She had dark, penetrating eyes that felt like they could see through a lie. They asked me the same questions, over and over, from different angles. I described the car, the exact time, Veronica's movements, the suitcase, everything. Miller stared at me with an intensity that made me feel guilty, even though I'd done nothing wrong. "And you're absolutely sure it was your daughter-in-law?" "Absolutely sure." "Why would she do something like this?" "I don't know." "Where is she now?" "I don't know." "When was the last time you spoke with her before today?" 3 weeks ago, on the anniversary of my son's death." Miller jotted something down. She exchanged a look with her partner. "We'll need you to come to the station to give a formal statement tomorrow," she said. "And you are not to have any contact with Miss Veronica under any circumstances. Do you understand?" I nodded. What would I even say to her? Why did you try to kill a baby? Why did you throw him in a lake like he was trash? Why? 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 The officers left. Joan came back with a blanket and a hot cup of tea. "You should go home, get some rest, change your clothes." But I couldn't leave. I couldn't leave that baby alone in the hospital. The baby I had held, the baby who had breathed his first real breath of hope in my arms. I stayed in the waiting room. Joan brought me a set of dry clothes from a hospital supply closet, a pair of scrubs, and an oversized t-shirt. I changed in the restroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked like I'd aged 10 years in a single afternoon. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in that plastic chair watching the clock. Every hour I'd get up and ask about the baby. The nurses all gave me the same answer. Stable, critical, but fighting. Around 3 amperes. Father Anthony, the priest from my church, showed up. Someone must have called him. He sat down next to me in the quiet. He didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there. Sometimes, that's all you need. A presence. Proof that you're not entirely alone in hell. "The Lord tests us in many ways," he finally said. "This doesn't feel like a test," I answered. "It feels like a curse." He nodded. He didn't try to convince me otherwise, and for that, I was more grateful than for any sermon he could have given. When the sun started to peek over the horizon, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. I had crossed some kind of line. I had seen something I could never unsee. And whatever happened next, well, I was just going to have to face it, because that baby, that tiny little soul fighting for every breath in the other room, he had become my responsibility. I didn't choose it, but I couldn't walk away from it either. Not after pulling him from the water, not after feeling that tiny flutter of a heartbeat against my own chest. Dawn broke without me even noticing. The light just sort of spilled through the waiting room windows, painting everything in a pale, tired orange. I'd been sitting in that hard plastic chair all night long. My back ached something fierce. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but I couldn't leave. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that suitcase sinking, I saw that tiny, still body. I saw those blue lips. At 7 inches the morning, Joan showed up, finishing her night shift. She brought me a cup of coffee and a sandwich wrapped in foil. "You need to eat something," she said, pressing it into my hands. I wasn't hungry, but I ate it anyway, because she stood there waiting, with a quiet sort of kindness that I couldn't refuse. The coffee was too hot, burned my tongue. The sandwich tasted like cardboard, but I swallowed. I chewed. I pretended I was a normal person doing a normal thing on a normal morning. "The baby's stable," Joan said, sitting down beside me. "His body temperature is coming up. His lungs are responding to the treatment. That's a good sign." "Can I see him?" She shook her head. "Not yet. It's immediate family only, and we don't even know who the family is." Family. The word landed like a stone in my chest. That baby had to have a family. A mother, Veronica. But she had tried to kill him. So who was the father? Where was he? Why hadn't anyone reported a missing child? The questions just piled up in my head with no answers in sight. At 9 o'clock, Detective Miller returned. She was alone this time. She sat across from me, holding a file folder. Her face was hard, clinical. She looked at me like I was the suspect. "Mrs. Hayes, I need to ask you a few more questions," she said, opening the folder. "I've told you everything I know." "I know, but a few contradictions have come up." "Contradictions?" The word hung between us like an accusation. I felt my stomach tighten. "What kind of contradictions?" Miller slid a photograph across the small table between us. It was Veronica's car, but it was in a parking lot, not by the lake. "This photo was taken by a security camera at a shopping mall 50 miles from here," she said, her voice flat. "At 5:20 yesterday afternoon." 5:20. 15 minutes after I saw her at the lake. It wasn't possible. I looked closer at the picture. It was her car, all right, the license plate. Everything matched. I could even see a small scratch on the rear bumper that I remembered Sam complaining about once. Then Miller swiped to a video clip. On the screen was Veronica, clear as day, pushing a shopping cart. She was wearing different clothes, a cream-colored sweater and jeans, and she looked completely relaxed. She picked out a few items, then went to the checkout counter. The timestamp on the camera read 5:25. "That's impossible," I stammered. "There must be some mistake. I saw her. I was there. I saw her throw the suitcase." Miller looked me dead in the eye. "Are you absolutely sure it was Veronica? How far away were you?" I swallowed hard. A little bit of panic started to creep into my mind. About 100 yards, maybe more. I mostly saw her from the back. The gray dress, the dark hair, the silver car. "The gray dress?" Miller interrupted. "You see, in this video, she's wearing jeans. And according to the cashier's statement, she was in that store for at least half an hour." "But I'm sure," I said, but my voice sounded a lot less convincing now, even to me. Miller leaned forward, her voice taking on a sharper edge. "Mrs. Hayes, I need you to be honest with me. What is your relationship with Veronica like? Do you two get along?" And there it was, the real question, the one I'd been expecting since the police first showed up, because we didn't get along, we never had. From the day Sam introduced us, I knew something wasn't right. She was too perfect, too polished, too interested in the money Sam made as an architect. She had a smile that was always on her face, but it never, ever reached her eyes. "We aren't close," I admitted, my voice dry. "Do you blame her for your son's death?" "What?" My voice was too loud, too defensive. "It's a simple question, ma'am. Do you blame Veronica for Sam's death?" "The accident. That's what everyone called it. Sam had been driving home from dinner with Veronica. It was raining. The car lost control. It hit a tree. Sam was killed instantly. Veronica walked away with just a few scratches. It had always seemed strange to me. It had always seemed too convenient. But I never had any proof. Just a heartbroken mother looking for someone to blame. I don't see what that has to do with the baby." "It has everything to do with it," Miller said, closing the folder, "because we've been in contact with Veronica. She's been completely cooperative. She's provided receipts, credit card statements. She says she was nowhere near Willow Creek yesterday, and you're the only person who says you saw her there." Her words were like a bucket of ice water to the face. She was accusing me, not directly, but the implication was as clear as day. She thought I'd made the whole thing up, that I'd found the baby some other way and was pinning it on Veronica out of spite. "I am not lying," I said through clenched teeth. "I saw what I saw." "Then we have a big problem here, Mrs. Hayes," Miller said as she stood up, her face unreadable. "Because if Veronica didn't dump that baby, then someone who looks exactly like her did. Or, your memory is playing tricks on you." She left her card with her number on it. "If you remember any other details, anything at all, give me a call." She left, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. I sat there, her business card in my hand, wondering if I was losing my mind. I had seen Veronica. I was so sure of it. But now, doubt was seeping into my mind like a poison. What if I was wrong? What if it was someone else? What if my grief and my resentment had made me see what I wanted to see? I felt that stuffy little waiting room closing in on me. The beige walls felt like they were pressing down. The smell of disinfectant was making me sick. I was the only person who believed my own story. To the rest of the world, I was just a grieving, confused old woman who probably couldn't be trusted. And the baby in the other room, the grandson I didn't even know I had, was fighting for his life all alone, while the person who tried to kill him was still out there, free and clear, protected by a perfect alibi. I dropped my head into my hands. For the first time since Sam died, I felt completely and utterly hopeless. I hadn't just lost my son. I was losing my own mind. Detective Miller left a cold void in that waiting room and a hurricane in my heart. Was I crazy? Had I imagined the whole thing? The gray dress, the dark hair, that guilty look. Was it all just a product of an old mind, tired out from grieving? I looked down at my hands, still covered in tiny scratches from wrestling with that suitcase. No, they were real. The cold of the lake water, the weight of that case, and the baby's faint breath on my cheek, they were real. I couldn't be wrong, but how do you fight a video? A store receipt? The next few days passed in a fog of doubt and despair. The police treated me like an unreliable witness. They were polite, but distant. The baby in the suitcase case became an unsolved mystery on the local news, a horror story with no suspect. But I couldn't give up. I still went to the hospital every single day. I became a fixture there, the old woman in the waiting room. The nurses looked at me with pity. Only Joan still treated me with respect. She'd bring me coffee, give me updates on the baby, and listen to me tell the story of that afternoon over and over again, without a hint of judgment. The baby, that tiny baby boy, was a fighter. The doctors called his recovery a miracle. He made it through the critical phase. His skin was no longer blue, but a healthy, rosy pink. He started breathing on his own, without the machines. I'd stand for hours outside the NICU, looking at him through the thick glass. He had a tuft of black hair, just like Sam had when he was born. He had long fingers, just like Sam, too. Every time I looked at him, my heart ached in a strange way, a connection I just couldn't explain. I decided to call him Leo. It was the name Sam once told me he'd give his first son, if he ever had one. "It means lion, Mom," he'd said one Christmas dinner. Strong and brave. This baby, he deserved that name. The social workers came too, a young woman named Aline, with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. She asked me questions about my finances, my mental state, about post-traumatic stress. I knew she was assessing whether I might be hallucinating. They said that when Leo was discharged, he would be placed in a temporary foster home. The news was a knife in my heart. Handing the baby I'd saved over to strangers? Not on your life. But what rights did I have? I was just the old woman who found him. About a week after that fateful day, I was sitting in my kitchen, staring out at the lake, trying to piece it all together, when the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick it up. "Hello, Mrs. Hayes. This is Detective Miller." Her voice was different. The cold, distant tone was gone. There was an urgency to it, almost an embarrassment. "Can you come down to the station right now? There's been a new development in the case. It's important." My heart started to pound. A new development? Had they found the woman? I drove to the station, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Miller met me at the door. She led me into her small, cluttered office. She offered me a seat, then sat down across from me, folding her hands on the desk. She was quiet for a long moment, as if she were choosing her words very carefully. "Mrs. Hayes," she finally began, we made a mistake in how we evaluated your testimony." I held my breath. "As part of our procedure, we took a DNA sample from the baby to enter into the National System for Abandoned Children," she continued, avoiding my eyes. "We also took a sample from you, as the finder, to rule out any biological connection." She paused, taking a deep breath. "And, just to be thorough, we ran those samples against your son Samuel's DNA profile, which was on file from his accident report." The room was so quiet I could hear the buzz of the fluorescent lights overhead. Miller pushed a piece of paper across the desk toward me. It was a lab report, full of scientific terms I didn't understand. But at the bottom, in bold print, was a conclusion that was impossible to mistake. "Mrs. Hayes," Miller's voice now held a respect that hadn't been there before, "the results show a near-perfect match. The baby, Leo, is not only related to you, he is your biological grandson, he is Samuel's son." My world tilted on its axis. I stared at the paper, the letters dancing in front of my eyes. My grandson, Sam's son, Sam's son. The words echoed in my head, over and over. "How? How is that possible?" I whispered, my voice gone. "Sam's been gone for 6 months. Veronica, she never said anything about being pregnant." "That's the million-dollar question, ma'am," Miller said, leaning forward. "This case just took a whole different turn." I didn't hear much of what she said after that. My mind was reeling in a tornado of emotions, shock, an incredible, unspeakable joy that rose up from deep inside me, a joy that was tangled up with the most profound pain. Sam had a son. A piece of him was still here. And then, another, horrifying truth slammed into me, as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. If Leo was Sam's son, then his mother could only be Veronica. Veronica had been pregnant with Sam's child. She had hidden it from everyone. She had given birth in secret. And then, she had tried to kill him. Her alibi was no longer a contradiction. It was part of a plan, something darker and more monstrous than I could have ever imagined. The woman I saw at the lake was Veronica. But the woman on the security camera was, too. How could she be in 2 places at once? Or rather, how had she staged it all? A rage burned through me, chasing away the self-doubt that had tormented me for a week. I wasn't crazy. I had been right all along. And my daughter-in-law, the woman my son had loved, wasn't just a liar. She was a monster. I lifted my head and looked Detective Miller straight in the eye. The weakness and despair inside me were gone, replaced by a will of iron. "Find her, Detective," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Find that monster. For my son, and for my grandson." My fight had only just begun. But now, I knew what I was fighting for. I wasn't just fighting for the truth. I was fighting for my own flesh and blood, for Sam's last legacy. The shock of the DNA results changed everything. I was no longer a pitiable, confused old woman in Detective Miller's eyes. I was her most important witness, the victim's grandmother, the only person who had seen the killer's true face before she could put her perfect mask back on. The treatment I got from the police department did a complete 180. They offered me coffee. They called me Mrs. Hayes, with genuine respect. But none of that could soothe the rage and pain churning inside me. Veronica had vanished. After that first phone call to confirm her alibi, she stopped answering her phone. The luxury apartment she and Sam had shared was empty. The doorman said she'd moved out 2 days prior, leaving only a note saying she needed some time alone. She was on the run. That only confirmed her guilt. While the police put out an alert and started to follow Veronica's digital breadcrumbs, Detective Miller decided to do something they should have done from the very beginning: dig deep into my son's life. "Mrs. Hayes, I know this is difficult," Miller told me during another meeting in her office, "but I need your permission to go through all of Samuel's personal belongings. His computer, his phone, his papers, anything that might give us a clue as to what was really going on in their marriage." I hesitated. That was Sam's private world. To go through it felt like a violation of his very soul. But I knew it had to be done. "Do whatever it takes," I answered, my voice stiff to hide the tremor. A few days later, I got a call from Miller. She sounded strangely excited. "Mrs. Hayes, can you come down to my office? "We found something." When I got there, she was sitting behind her desk, and on it was Sam's laptop. Miller turned the screen toward me. "We had to get a specialist to unlock his computer, and in his bank history we found this." She pointed to a line on the statement. "A payment of $5,000 to a company called Eagle Eye Investigative Services, made just 3 weeks before Sam died. Your son hired a private investigator," Miller said, her gaze sharpening, "and we paid him a visit." Miller placed a brown file folder on the desk and pushed it toward me. "I'm sorry you have to see this," she said, her voice softening just a little. My hand was shaking as I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, surveillance photos. The first one was of Veronica sitting in a coffee shop, laughing with a man. The man wasn't Sam. He was younger, with dark, slicked-back hair and a smug sort of smile. His hand was resting on Veronica's in a way that was far too familiar. In the second, they were walking through a park, hand in hand. In the third, and this was the one that made my stomach clench into a tight, sick knot, they were kissing outside an unfamiliar apartment building, a deep, passionate kiss. I felt nauseous. My son, my kind, faithful son, had been betrayed. It turned out I was right about Veronica from the very beginning. A mother's intuition hadn't been wrong, but the truth was so much uglier than I could have ever imagined. "Who is he?" I asked, my voice hoarse with shock and anger. "His name is Kyle McGregor," Miller answered, flipping to a report page. 36 years old, a former colleague of Veronica's at a marketing firm. He quit about a year ago. Has a less than sparkling record, gambling debts, been sued a few times for non-payment. A classic opportunist, living on his charm. I looked back at the photos. Sam had known. My son had known he was being cheated on. How much pain had he been in? Why didn't he tell me? Why did he suffer alone? Maybe he was too embarrassed. Or maybe he was trying to find a way to save his marriage, because he was a good man. A man who always believed in the best in people, even when they didn't deserve it. "Where is Kyle now?" I asked. "That's the interesting part," Miller said. "We checked him out. He also has a rock-solid alibi for the day the baby was abandoned. He was at an all-day conference in another city. There are even pictures of him with the keynote speaker. It seems Veronica planned everything very carefully, making sure both she and her lover were in the clear." The calculation of it all sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't a panicked, spur-of-the-moment act. This was a meticulously arranged plan. So what's the theory now?" I asked, trying to arrange the horrible pieces in my head. Veronica was having an affair. Sam found out. What then? "That's what we're trying to figure out," Miller admitted. "There are so many questions. Why would Veronica have a baby with Sam if she was in love with someone else? Was the baby even Kyle's?" "No," I said instantly. "The DNA was clear. Leo is Sam's son." Miller nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Right, which makes it all the more complicated. Maybe she got pregnant with Sam to try and save the marriage, or to secure an inheritance? And Sam's accident, was it really an accident?" The question hung in the air, heavy and terrifying. Up until this moment, I had always tried to believe that Sam's death, as tragic as it was just a random, terrible twist of fate. But now, with the curtain pulled back on Veronica's lies, another, more monstrous possibility began to take shape. What if it wasn't an accident? What if Sam died not because of rain and a slick road, but for another reason entirely, a reason that involved his cheating wife and her lover? I looked out the window of Miller's office. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds that looked ready to burst. It looked just like the sky on the night I lost Sam. "Detective," I said, my voice surprisingly firm, "I want you to reinvestigate my son's accident. Please, check the car again. Check everything." Miller looked at me, and this time there was no doubt in her eyes, only a deep, shared understanding. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, "that's exactly what we're going to do. I left the police station, but I didn't go home. I drove to the cemetery. I stood in front of Sam's headstone, the engraved letters of his name and his dates blurring through my tears. The wind rustled through the trees, making a whispering sound. "I'm so sorry, Sam," I whispered to the cold stone. "I'm sorry I didn't know what you were going through, but I promise you, I will find the truth. I will get justice for you, And I will protect your son. I promise." Standing there, in the silence of the dead, I felt a new strength. I wasn't a lonely, grieving old woman anymore. I was a mother on a mission for justice. I was a grandmother protecting her own. And I would not stop until the truth was brought into the light and the guilty paid for what they had done. My promise at Sam's grave wasn't just empty words. It became my compass for everything I did. Every morning I woke up, the image of his kind smile and Leo's tiny face gave me strength. I no longer sat brooding on my porch. I called Detective Miller every day, sometimes twice, asking for updates on the investigation. I knew I was probably being a pest, but I didn't care. A mother's persistence can move mountains, and I wasn't going to let them forget my son. About a week later, Miller called me back. "We have news, Mrs. Hayes," she said, her voice all business. "The court order went through. The forensics team is on its way to the salvage yard to re-examine your son's car." The news brought both a surge of hope and a wave of terrible fear. Hope that the truth would finally be found, and fear that the truth would confirm the worst possible thing a mother could imagine, that her child was murdered. I was on pins and needles all day. I tried to clean the house, to garden, to read anything to keep my mind busy. But all my thoughts were at that salvage yard, where the twisted wreck of Sam's car sat like a metal tomb. I pictured the forensic experts in their white suits, meticulously checking every part, looking for the smallest sign, the faintest trace of foul play. Late in the afternoon, as I was fixing a simple dinner I knew I wouldn't be able to eat, the phone rang. It was Miller. "Mrs. Hayes," she said, and I could hear the tension in her voice. "You were right." Just those 3 words were enough to make my heart seize in my chest. "They found it," Miller continued. "The brake line. It wasn't severed in the crash, it was cut. A clean, deliberate cut. There's no doubt about it. Your son's death was not an accident. I had to grab the kitchen counter to keep from falling. The air was sucked out of my lungs. So, it was true. The most horrible thing. My son, my kind, gentle son, had been murdered. He had been taken from me." Grief erupted, a tsunami of emotion that threatened to drown me. But right behind it, another feeling rose up, even stronger, rage, a cold, hard, steel-like rage. They had killed my son, Veronica and her lover. "Kyle," I said through my teeth, the name a bitter taste in my mouth. "Have you arrested him?" "We've brought him in for questioning immediately. He's on his way here now. We'll let you know as soon as we have anything." That night, I didn't sleep a wink. I sat in my dark living room, staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring. Every car that passed on the street made me jump. I pictured Kyle sitting in an interrogation room under a bright white light. What would he say? Would he deny it, or would he break and tell them everything? Around 2 inches the morning, the phone finally rang. It was Miller again. "He confessed," she said, her voice tired, but with a satisfaction she couldn't hide. I closed my eyes, a shaky breath escaping my chest. "Everything?" I asked. "Most of it," Miller replied. "He admitted to cutting the brakes. He's a weak man, couldn't handle the pressure for long. When we presented the forensic evidence, along with phone data that showed him lurking near your son's house the night before the crash, he just crumbled." "What did he say?" "He claims it was Veronica's idea. He said Sam had found out about their affair after seeing the PI's report. Sam confronted Veronica, told her he was filing for divorce and making sure she wouldn't get a single penny. Veronica panicked. She told Kyle that if Sam went public, both of their lives would be ruined. She convinced Kyle that the only way to solve the problem was to make Sam disappear. I listened, disgust rising in my throat. The cold-bloodedness of it. They had discussed killing a human being like they were planning a business deal. "So Veronica was directly involved?" I asked. "Kyle insists he was the only one who physically tampered with the car. He says Veronica just did the planning and the pushing. He's trying to downplay her role, probably still blindly in love with her. He said that after Sam died, Veronica became distant and paranoid. He said she kept saying it all went too far. An act. It was all an act to manipulate a fool." "What about the baby?" I asked, the most important question of all. "What did he say about Leo?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's the strange part," Miller said. "Kyle swears he knew absolutely nothing about a baby. He said Veronica never once mentioned being pregnant. When we told him that Veronica had given birth to Sam's son, he was genuinely shocked. He just kept repeating, "That's impossible." His statement confused me. If Kyle didn't know, then Veronica's plan was even more complex. She had been deceiving both her husband and her lover. But why? Why go through a pregnancy and a secret birth, only to throw the child away? "So what do we have now?" I asked Miller. "We have Kyle's confession for the murder. What about Veronica? Is his testimony enough to charge her?" "It'll be a fight," Miller admitted. "Her lawyer will argue it's just the word of an accomplice trying to pin the blame to get a lighter sentence. We need more evidence to prove Veronica's direct involvement, but at least we have one of them in custody, and we've issued a warrant for Veronica's arrest for first-degree murder as a conspirator. She can't hide forever." I hung up the phone, feeling a tangled mess of emotions. Part of me was relieved. Finally, one of the people who killed my son had admitted to their crime. Justice was beginning to turn its wheels. But another part of me was more worried than ever. There were still too many holes in the story. What was the baby's role in all of this? And Veronica, that viper, was still out there, hiding in the shadows. I got up and went to the window, staring out into the night. Willow Creek was dark and mysterious. It had seen the beginning of this nightmare, and I had a feeling it was still hiding more secrets. My fight wasn't over. It had just entered a new, darker, and more complicated chapter. I had to be stronger than ever for Sam and for Leo, the little grandson that fate had so cruelly delivered into my hands. Kyle's confession stirred up our whole little town of Willow Creek. The tragic accident of the young architect Samuel Hayes was now officially a murder investigation. Veronica and Kyle's names were on the front page of the local paper. My house was surrounded by news vans. I had to keep the curtains drawn, living in a dim, suffocating light that matched my mood. People looked at me with pity when I went out for groceries. "We're so sorry about your son," they'd say. I would just nod, not knowing how to reply. My private grief had become a public spectacle. Kyle was denied bail, but Veronica was still nowhere to be found. It was like she'd just vanished off the face of the earth. The police tracked her credit cards, her phone, but there was nothing. She had prepared for this escape. While the hunt for Veronica continued, Detective Miller was still haunted by the one question Kyle's confession left behind. Why Sam's baby? "It just makes no sense, Mrs. Hayes," Miller told me on a call. "If Veronica and Kyle were in love and wanted to be together, why would she get pregnant by the husband she was planning to kill? Why not Kyle's baby? And why wouldn't Kyle know anything about it?" I couldn't make sense of it either. A woman's mind can be complicated, but Veronica's actions were beyond any logic I knew. It was like a chess game where she was the only one who knew the rules. Maybe she wanted to use the baby to tie Sam down before everything came out? I guessed. Maybe she thought if she had his child, Sam would forgive her. "Maybe," Miller said, but her voice was full of doubt. "But it still seems too risky. There's something we're missing." And then, a few days later, that something we were missing showed up, and it came from a place no one would have ever thought to look. Miller called me, an excitement in her voice she couldn't quite contain. "Mrs. Hayes, I need you to confirm something for me. Your son, did Samuel ever have any health problems? Anything at all, no matter how small?" I searched my memory. "No, Sam was always a healthy boy. Oh, wait a minute," I suddenly remembered. When he was about 15, he had a pretty bad case of the mumps. The doctor said it might affect his ability to have children later on. But that was just a possibility, and it was so long ago. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear the faint click-clack of Miller typing on her keyboard. "Thank you, Mrs. Hayes, this is very important." She didn't explain any more than that, but I had a feeling they'd found a major piece of the puzzle. I spent the rest of the day on edge. That evening, Miller came to my house. It was the first time she'd done that. She looked tired, but her eyes had an unusual spark. She sat down in the armchair across from me in the living room. "Mrs. Hayes," she began, "we followed a hunch. After our call, we got a court order for your son's full medical records, and you were right. His doctor confirmed that after that case of the mumps, a series of tests showed that Samuel was sterile. He was unable to have children naturally." I was stunned. Then Leo, that's the very question that's been keeping us up at night," Miller said. How could a sterile man have a child? There's only one logical explanation. She pulled another folder from her briefcase. We went back through Veronica's financial records for the past year. We found a large payment, about $20,000, to a place called the New Hope Fertility Clinic. We paid them a visit with a warrant. She pushed a paper across the coffee table toward me. This is their file. It turns out, years ago, after his diagnosis, Samuel underwent a procedure called sperm banking as a precaution for the future. He had told Veronica about it. The pieces started to click into place in the most horrifying way. 10 months ago, Miller continued, her voice steady but full of weight, Veronica went to that clinic alone. She told them that she and her husband were ready to start a family. She presented the necessary paperwork, and she forged Samuel's signature on the consent forms for an in vitro fertilization, or IVF, procedure. My mouth fell open. I couldn't speak. The level of deceit, it was just beyond anything I could imagine. She fooled everyone, Miller concluded. The doctors, her husband, and her lover. She planned to get pregnant with Samuel's child without him ever knowing. This baby wasn't a product of love or an accident. He was part of a plan. But why? I whispered, trying to comprehend this bottomless evil. Why go to such lengths? That's what we've been working to figure out, Miller said. But I have a theory. Veronica knew her relationship with Kyle had no financial future. Kyle was drowning in debt. Samuel was a successful architect with a considerable estate. She likely saw having Samuel's child as an insurance policy. If the marriage survived, she'd have it all. If it fell apart, she'd still get a hefty child support settlement and would have a claim to his assets through the child. She wanted Kyle's love and Sam's money. A perfect plan. A plan that was cruel and selfish to its very core. She had used her own child as a pawn in her game. She had turned the sacred gift of life into a tool for fraud and greed. I dropped my head into my hands, a wave of revulsion washing over me. The woman my son had loved, the woman he had given his heart and his trust to, was a liar to her very bones. He had been living in a marriage built on a rotten foundation of deceit. So, did Sam know? I asked, looking up. Did he know Veronica was pregnant before he died? Miller shook her head. We can find no evidence of that. As far as we can tell, Samuel died without ever knowing he was going to be a father. Veronica hid it perfectly. A single tear rolled down my cheek. This pain was even more bitter than the pain of losing him. Sam hadn't just been robbed of his life. He'd been robbed of the right to know his own son, robbed of the joy of fatherhood. I looked at Miller, the anger inside me now cold and sharp. So now we know the truth. She lied to get pregnant. She and her lover murdered her husband. And then, for some reason, she tried to kill the very child she went to such lengths to have. Do we have enough, Detective? Do we have enough to put that monster away for life? We're getting very close, Mrs. Hayes, Miller said, her eyes determined. We have the motive. We have the accomplice's testimony. We have the proof of fraud. There's just one last piece of the puzzle. Why get rid of the baby? If we can answer that, we'll have everything. I knew she was right, but in my heart the answer was already clear. A woman who could do all of that was capable of anything. There was no limit to her wickedness. The IVF revelation was a shock, but it still didn't answer that final, nagging question. Why did Veronica throw Leo away? If the baby was her trump card, her ticket to Sam's fortune, why would she literally throw that ticket away? Even a criminal's logic has to make some sense, and this act seemed to go against everything we had learned about her calculations. Detective Miller was obsessed with it too. It's like a bank robber who breaks into the vault, opens the safe, and then just throws the money out the window, she told me on the phone. There has to be a reason, one we're not seeing. That reason came from a man I hadn't seen in months, but who held the key to the entire secret. Miller had spent days going back through all of Sam's legal documents. Not just the standard will, but everything. Insurance policies, investment papers, business agreements. And she found one name that kept coming up. Albert Peterson, attorney at law. Mr. Peterson wasn't just Sam's lawyer. He had been my husband's best friend, and the Hayes family legal counsel for over 40 years. He was a man of the old school, decent, meticulous, and sharp as a tack. After Sam died, I was in too much of a grief-stricken fog to handle the legal affairs, and I knew Mr. Peterson would handle everything with the utmost care. "Mrs. Hayes," Miller said to me, "I think we need to pay Mr. Peterson a visit. Your son's will is a lot more complicated than we thought." The next day, Miller and I went to Mr. Peterson's law office downtown. It was just as I remembered it, with floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves and the faint smell of old paper and leather in the air. Mr. Peterson, now in his late 70s with a full head of white hair but eyes still sharp behind thick glasses, greeted us with a firm handshake. "Martha," he said to me, his voice deep and warm, "I'm so sorry we have to meet again under these circumstances." He looked at Miller. "Detective, I've been expecting your call." We sat in the leather armchairs. Mr. Peterson went to a steel cabinet, unlocked it, and pulled out a thick folder labeled Estate of Samuel Hayes. "When Sam came to see me about 8 months ago," he began, "he was a mess. He showed me the private investigator's report. He knew about Kyle. He was heartbroken." I clenched my hands together, the old pain flaring up. "He wanted a divorce," Peterson continued, "but he didn't want to make a big scene. He still loved Veronica, or at least the idea of her he once had. He wanted to give her an easy way out, but he was no fool. He knew how obsessed Veronica was with money. He was afraid she'd try to take him to the cleaners in the divorce." He turned a few pages. "And then he told me something. He told me about the sperm bank. He said that no matter what happened with his marriage, he had always dreamed of being a father, and he wanted to make sure that if there ever was a child in the future, whether with Veronica or someone else, that child would be protected." Mr. Peterson looked directly at me. "So, Samuel did something very, very smart. He set up not just a will, but an irrevocable trust." Miller and I glanced at each other. "A trust," Peterson explained, "means that Samuel's entire estate, the house, the investments, the savings, the life insurance, everything, worth several $1,000,000, would not pass directly to an heir. Instead, it was placed into a fund managed by a trustee." "And that trustee is you?" Miller asked. "Correct," Peterson nodded. "Under the terms Sam laid out, if he died and had a biologically confirmed child, the entire estate would belong to that child. But the child wouldn't be able to touch the principal capital until they turned 25. He paused, letting the information sink in. "And what about Veronica?" I asked. "As the baby's mother," Peterson said, and I could see a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Veronica would only be the guardian. She would be entitled to a monthly stipend from the trust to cover the child's living expenses. A generous amount, enough to live comfortably, but absolutely not the fortune she was dreaming of. Every major expense, every transaction, would have to be approved by me. I would have complete control of the purse strings." Miller and I looked at each other again, and this time we understood everything. The gilded cage. Veronica thought she was holding the key to a treasure chest, but it turned out to be the key to a gold-plated cage. She would never have the financial freedom she craved. She would be living under the thumb of a man she knew was completely loyal to Sam's memory. The baby, once her insurance policy, had now become the shackles that bound her. "And that's not all," Peterson said, his voice turning serious. He pulled a copy of a letter from the file. "After Veronica had the baby in secret, she must have contacted my office to begin the process of receiving the stipend. She had to avoid suspicion. And I, as trustee, have a responsibility to ensure the beneficiary's well-being. So, I did what was required by protocol." He pushed the letter toward us. It was a letter sent by certified mail. "I sent Ms. Veronica a letter," Peterson said, "informing her that I needed to schedule an official in-person meeting to verify the status and health of the beneficiary, meaning baby Leo. I proposed a meeting for 10 a.m. on October 13th. I stared at the date. My heart stopped. That was the day the baby was thrown in the lake. "This letter was delivered to her apartment at 9 a.m. that morning," Peterson concluded. "She would have received it just a few hours before you saw her at the lake. The ticking time bomb. This was it. That appointment was a test Veronica and Kyle could never pass. They couldn't bring a baby to a sharp-witted lawyer without raising 1,000 questions. They couldn't explain the secret birth. They panicked. Their clean plan to inherit the money was in ruins. There was only one option left in their sick minds: make the baby disappear. Permanently. Then, they could report the baby had tragically died, and as the sole remaining next of kin, Veronica could petition the court to dissolve the trust and inherit everything. The final piece clicked into place. The whole picture was there, stark and hideous. Every action, every lie, every crime, all of it driven by a bottomless greed and an immeasurable cruelty. I stood up, feeling a cold clarity. "We have it all now, don't we, detective?" I said. "Motive, method, and the trigger. We have everything we need to put her away." Miller stood with me, her expression resolute. "Yes, Mrs. Hayes," she said. "We do. Now we just have to find her." The truth about the trust was like the final thunderclap that cleared away any lingering doubt. The picture was complete, every line drawn with greed, betrayal, and an inhuman cruelty. The investigation was no longer about finding clues, it was a hunt. The entire Willow Creek County Police Force seemed to be dedicated to finding Veronica. Her picture was everywhere: bus stations, airports, train depots, a beautiful phantom with empty eyes, a smile that had once charmed my son, now a symbol of evil. In the days after the meeting with Mr. Peterson, I lived in a strange state of high alert. Every phone call made me jump. Every strange car that slowed down in front of my house made my heart pound. I knew she wouldn't dare come back here, but an irrational fear still clung to me. I kept all the windows locked even during the day. My house, once a sanctuary, had become a fortress. Leo was released from the hospital. It was a true miracle. He was in my arms, small and warm. The social workers, after reviewing the entire situation, agreed to let me have temporary custody under close supervision. Sam's old room was now Leo's room. I packed away my son's things, carefully placing them in boxes, silent tears falling as I worked. In their place went a white crib, a changing table, and colorful baby toys. The house was no longer silent. It was filled with the sound of cries for milk in the middle of the night, tiny little burps, and the steady, rhythmic breathing of an innocent soul, fast asleep. Every time I held Leo, breathing in that sweet milky smell in his hair, I felt my resolve harden even more. I was protecting Sam's most precious legacy. I was protecting the future. The call I had been waiting for came on a Tuesday morning, nearly 2 weeks after we learned about the trust. I was giving Leo his bottle when the phone rang. It was Detective Miller. "We got her, Mrs. Hayes." The baby bottle nearly slipped from my hand. "Where?" "A cheap motel in Portland." She made a mistake. Used a credit card under a fake name to pay for the room, but the card was linked to an old account we were monitoring. She didn't put up a fight. It seems she was just tired of running. A wave of relief washed over me, but it was quickly followed by a knot of anxiety. "What now?" "We're bringing her back here. Mrs. Hayes, I have a somewhat unusual request. Veronica, she's asking to see you." I was stunned. "See me? What for?" "I don't know," Miller admitted. "Maybe she thinks she can manipulate you. Maybe it's just one last act of defiance. You are under no obligation to come." But I thought, maybe you'd want to be here when it all ends. I didn't hesitate for a second. "I'll be there." I called Joan, the kind nurse who had become a dear friend. She came right over to watch Leo. As I handed the baby to her, I looked deep into his eyes. "Grandma will be back soon, my little lion," I whispered. "Grandma is going to finish this." The police station had the same tense, stuffy air it always did. But this time, there was a difference. There was an air of expectation. Miller met me in the lobby and led me down a hallway I hadn't been to before. We stopped in front of a door with a large, dark pane of glass. "This is an observation room," Miller explained. "You can see and hear everything in the interrogation room, but they can't see you. It's better if you're in here." I nodded, grateful for that. I wasn't sure I could bear to be face to face with her. I looked through the glass. The interrogation room was cold and sterile. A metal table, 3 chairs. And sitting in one of those chairs with her back to us was Veronica. She had changed. Her long, dark hair had been chopped short in a clumsy, homemade way and dyed a cheap-looking blonde. She was wearing a worn-out jacket, but the arrogant posture was still there. She sat with her back straight, her arms crossed in front of her. Miller entered the room with another male officer. The interrogation began. At first, Veronica played the victim perfectly. she cried, claimed she was being framed, that she was grieving her husband, and was now being terrorized by the police. She demanded her lawyer. Miller calmly replied that her lawyer was on his way, but in the meantime they had a few questions. Miller started slowly, methodically. She placed Kyle's signed confession on the table. "Mr. Kyle McGregor has confessed to tampering with your husband's car brakes on your orders. What do you have to say about that?" Veronica let out a short, contemptuous laugh. "Kyle's a weakling. He'd say anything to save his own skin. He was obsessed with me. He probably killed Sam himself out of jealousy." Miller didn't flinch. She placed the file from the fertility clinic on the table. "And what about this, Veronica? Forging your husband's signature to undergo in vitro fertilization." For the first time, I saw a crack in her armor. Her smile vanished. We agreed to do it, but Sam wanted to keep it a secret. He didn't want his mother to know." She glanced toward the one-way glass, as if she knew I was there. "A nice try," Miller said, her voice flat, "but it doesn't explain this." And then Miller delivered the final blow. She placed the copy of the irrevocable trust on the table. "Your son set up a trust, Veronica. He moved his entire estate into it. You were only the guardian, set to receive a monthly stipend under the strict supervision of Mr. Peterson." The color drained from Veronica's face. She went deathly pale. Her confidence began to crumble. She stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. "And finally," Miller said, her voice now like ice, "there's this letter. A letter from Mr. Peterson, requesting a meeting to visit baby Leo. It was delivered to you at 9 a.m., and just a few hours later, the baby was found at the bottom of Willow Creek." Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. And then it happened. Veronica started to laugh. It wasn't a smirk this time. It was a hysterical, unhinged laugh. She threw her head back and laughed, as if she'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" she said when the laughter subsided, her voice now hard and full of venom. "You don't know anything." "Then enlighten us," Miller said. And she did. It all came pouring out of her like a toxic river. Not a tearful confession, but a proud, hate-filled indictment. "Yes, I did it," she hissed. "I did it all. Samuel was a fool, a romantic fool, always talking about love and family. He thought he could tie me down with love, but I wanted freedom. I wanted the world. I slept with Kyle, yes, because he was exciting, he was dangerous, not like Samuel who only ever thought about his work and his precious mother. But Kyle was useless, not a penny to his name. Samuel had everything. The plan was simple," she continued, her eyes wild. "Have his baby, tie him to me forever. If he behaved, I'd be a good wife. If he found out, the baby would be my weapon in the divorce court. I had it all figured out. But then he found out sooner than I planned. And he dared to threaten me, dared to say I wouldn't get a cent. He signed his own death warrant. Kyle was just a tool, a stupid pawn. All I had to do was cry a little, and he'd do anything." She paused for breath, and her eyes fell on the trust document again. "And then this damned trust. He dared to control me from beyond the grave. He wanted to turn me into a glorified nanny, collecting a monthly allowance from that old lawyer. Never." "The baby," she said, and the way the word dripped from her lips made my blood run cold. "He was no longer an asset. He had become a liability, a shackle. Peterson's letter, that was the last straw. I had to get rid of it, make it disappear." "So the woman at the mall was you?" Miller asked. "Of course it was me," Veronica screamed. "I drove there first, did my shopping, created the perfect alibi." Meanwhile, a friend of Kyle's, some junkie who owed him money, did the dirty work. Just had to dump a suitcase. Simple as that, but he couldn't even do that right. I stood in the observation room, one hand over my mouth, my body shaking uncontrollably. This wasn't a human being. This was a monster in human skin, not a shred of remorse, not an ounce of humanity. Just greed, selfishness, and a twisted, curdled hate. "All that money," she whispered, her voice full of bitterness. "It should have been mine. Samuel owed me. Your whole family owed me." Miller had heard enough. She gave a signal, and the male officer stepped forward and handcuffed Veronica. She didn't resist. She just sat there, panting, her eyes empty. The performance was over. Miller walked out of the interrogation room and into the observation room. She looked exhausted. She didn't say anything, just placed a hand on my shoulder. I didn't cry. My tears had all dried up. Instead, I felt a strange calm, a heavy emptiness. The nightmare had a name. The monster had shown its face. Justice for Sam was beginning, and the new life for me and Leo, a life built from the ashes of this tragedy, was, too. Veronica's cold confession in that interrogation room hammered the final nail into her own coffin. No more lies, no more acts, just the raw, ugly, and brutal truth. The recording of that confession, along with Kyle's testimony and all the evidence Detective Miller had so painstakingly gathered, built an ironclad case. The trial took place 6 months later. Those 6 months felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. My life now revolved around a tiny little being named Leo. The sleepless nights, the diaper changes, the first toothless smiles, they became the new rhythm of my days. The house was no longer a place of sorrow, but a true home, filled with babbling sounds and the sweet smell of milk. Joan became a sort of godmother, always there when I needed advice or just someone to talk to. Mr. Peterson handled all the legal matters, ensuring I had the means and support to care for Leo. I tried not to read the papers or watch the news about what they were calling the baby in the suitcase trial, but the story still seeped into my life. It was a dark shadow, a reminder of the price that had been paid for the small peace Leo and I now had. On the day of the verdict, I went. I had to be there for Sam. I sat in the front row, Detective Miller by my side. When Veronica was let in, she looked different. The arrogance was gone. She was thin, her eyes were sunken, the cheap blonde hair replaced by her natural dark roots growing out in ragged patches. She glanced at me once, a blank, emotionless look. I didn't have to testify. The recordings said it all. The prosecutors laid out the entire story, step by step, from the IVF scheme to the plot to kill Sam, and finally, the act of discarding her own innocent child. Veronica's defense attorney tried to argue temporary insanity, brought on by the stress of her husband's death, but no one believed it. Her own cold words had destroyed any possible sympathy. The jury took only 2 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty. The foreman read, loud and clear, on all charges. First, degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and felony child endangerment. When the judge handed down the sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole for Veronica, and 25 years for Kyle, I didn't feel joy. I just felt a profound emptiness. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring Sam back. It couldn't erase the scars this tragedy had left. After the trial, I walked out into the sunlit courthouse plaza. Miller was with me. "It's over, Mrs. Hayes," she said. "Thank you, Detective," I said, and this time I truly meant it. "Thank you for believing me, even when no one else did." She smiled, a genuine smile. "It's my job. But you were the real hero in this story." A few weeks later, I had another court date, this time in family court. The room was smaller, less formal. Aline, the social worker, was there, but her demeanor was completely changed. She smiled at me warmly. The judge, an older woman with silver hair, reviewed all the reports on my care for Leo, on the safe home I had provided, on the deep bond between the two of us. "Mrs. Martha Hayes," she said, her voice formal but kind. "After reviewing all the factors, and in light of the uniquely tragic circumstances of this case, this court can think of no one better suited to care for the child, Leo. The court hereby grants you full, permanent, and legal custody and guardianship." She banged her wooden gavel on the desk. A sharp, final crack. And just like that, it was real. Leo was mine. Legally. Forever. I broke down and cried right there in the courtroom. The tears I had been holding back for so many months finally came. Tears of relief, of sorrow, and of a fragile, trembling happiness. Life went on. The months turned into years. Leo grew into a bright, active, and happy little boy. He has Sam's eyes, Sam's smile. Every time he calls me Grandma, my heart just melts. I tell him a lot about his father. I show him pictures, tell him stories about Sam's childhood, about his kindness and his courage. "Your daddy was a hero, Leo. I often tell him as we sit by the lake. I have never told him about his mother. That truth is too cruel, too complicated for a child. Maybe one day, when he is old enough, strong enough, I will. But for now, I just want his childhood to be filled with love and safety, the very things he was almost denied. Today is Leo's 5th birthday. We're having a small party in the backyard. Joan is here, and so is Mr. Peterson. The neighborhood kids are running around. Leo, with a paper birthday hat on his head, is beaming as he blows out the candles on his cake. I sit in my familiar wooden chair on the porch, watching it all. The Earl Grey tea in my hand is warm. Willow Creek sparkles in the afternoon sun, no longer looking sinister at all. It gave me back the most precious gift. Joan comes and sits next to me. "What are you thinking about, Martha?" I smile. "I was thinking about legacies," I say. "When Sam died, I thought his legacy was just the houses he designed, the money in his bank account, but I was wrong." I look over at Leo, who is being cheered on by his friends. "Sam's real legacy isn't any of that," I continue, my voice catching a little. "His legacy isn't the money in a trust that caused so much pain. His real, most precious legacy is that little boy right there. A symbol of life that outlasted the most wicked of plans. Proof that even from the deepest darkness, love can find a way to grow." Joan takes my hand. We sit there in silence, watching the children play, listening to their laughter mix with the sound of the wind rustling through the willows by the lake. My life did not turn out the way I planned. At 72, I became a mother for the second time. It's been an exhausting, challenging journey, but every day, when I look into Leo's eyes, I know I wouldn't trade it for anything. I saved him, but in a way, he saved me too. He gave me a reason to live, to fight, and to love again. And that, right there, is the most precious legacy of all.